Welcome to the Practice Podcast, conversations probing the nature of practice. I'm your host, Dave Fearon. This is a conversation with Rick Brush and Jeff Doemland, who together, with a lot of help from a lot of wonderful people, including Esther Dyson, created an idea whose time has come. It's called Wellville. Wellville. And it happens in 5 different communities around the country. And it's been going on for close to 10 years. And these 2 gentlemen have formal and official ways of keeping the Wellville experiment going across the board, but they wanted to be introduced as advisors to different Wellville groups and learning with them, not teaching them in the old-fashioned notion of teaching. And there are so many clips that I could make on this one that I just don't know which one I'll choose, but there was something that Jeff said about why he was able to succeed as an advisor all this time. And it had to do with when he was teaching English as a professor, and he realized that he could create better results with the learners if he let go, and that's the word he used, of his officiousness, his professorial garb, if you will, and just said, well, let's learn together. You are going to see things that I don't see in this particular novel or this particular poem, and vice versa. So let's just get on with it. And years later, he said almost 40 years later, the same philosophy of his presence, and Rick echoed the same thing, is they are there as appreciative learners, as hungry learners, with these different folks who have convened under the Wellville umbrella. So enough about me talking about them. Listen to them talking with me, and you will understand everything about why practice matters so much to them, to me, and hopefully it will continue to matter to you. Because it's human beings at their best, in practice, doing their best at their best. And that's Rick Brush and Jeff Doemland. Folks, this is a conversation among 3 educators of different kinds, which I think is delightful. Some of you know that I would probably fall under the category of a school educator or a university educator. But the 2 gentlemen, Rick Brush and Jeff Doemland, are educators of the world, in the world, with a focus on wellness. So while they may or may not be licensed health educators or whatever the stipulations that we tend to want to have, that doesn't matter from my standpoint, and just getting to know them very briefly. They are just compelled to want to help people learn how to take better care of their health and each other in their health. So let's see. First, Rick, I've laid that on you. Have you thought of yourself as an educator?
No, I have not. And I would think, first and foremost, a learner. I think we're all, learning beings, creatures. And this work you described as helping people take better care of themselves. And I also think that we see that a little differently at Wellville. I think we're discovering together what it takes to create healthier, more vibrant communities. And right. And we're not coming in with prescriptions or lists of better ways to take care of ourselves. We're sort of learning with our communities how that really takes hold in the world in their unique contexts.
Well, I'll flip that. in the business of helping people learn how their communities help them take better care of themselves, and therefore what role they have in making sure the community does that. They're not passive recipients. I'm living here, therefore the community is taking care. Yeah. I'm looking after me. There's a responsibility. Jeff, what's your thought on that?
Oh, that interesting. The way you just described it, Dave, the way I heard it makes it sound as if the community is an abstract something or other outside of the people. And I think I'm just going to play off what Rick said a little bit and say that the community is the people coming together and how they come together. So Rick earlier said that he said that human beings are learners by nature. But that, yeah, I will agree to that, and add to it that they're also social by nature.
Yeah.
So, insofar as that's the case, how they interact with each other is how communities take shape.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can go into our communities with a learning disposition, then that encourages and opens up a space for the people that we come into contact with to similarly take a learning disposition, which implies, I think, that no one of them or us has it all figured out, and gives everybody a chance to play along. And that's the kind of community I think that we're striving to foster.
I really like that notion of learning disposition, and that it's not exclusive to some, but not to others, that it's something that can be inspired and brought out, demonstrated. Rick, you corrected my educator label with I am a learner. And Jeff has talked about that being an important aspect of what your work is, demonstrating a learning disposition. So how does that work out on a practical level usually?
Yeah, I was just reflecting on my resisting the label of educator, and I do think that, in some ways we are viewed as coming in with some, let's say, area of expertise. And
sure.
So Wellville is a 10-year project working with 5 communities. So one of the things we bring in is an understanding of how these other, no matter what community we're in, how the other 4 communities are going about the work, how they're sort of bringing community members, stakeholders together, what's working, what's not. So we do, in some sense, I suppose, bring like an educational component, but I think that if I understand the question mark after the word practice, here it's that, we maybe we don't want to fall into the trap of believing that we have all those answers, that it really is about the ongoing practice and learning and refinement. And so I think I do. So I'm gonna say maybe it is both. I think maybe we're all, in some sense, educators and learners together. And that's very much what we experience. We come in as Wellville advisors, to these 5 communities, but we really don't know much about the actual lived experience of those who reside in those communities. So, they are the educators in that sense. When I'm in the North End neighborhoods of Hartford, Connecticut, where I don't live, I need to listen in a particular way that, goes beyond what I already assume about North Hartford, so that, they're the residents of North Hartford are educating me. And I do feel like, going back to what Jeff said about, sort of coming together in such a way that we can learn from each other, that's really what happens, is that we come in with our own experiences, our own ideas and insights, some of this gathered from working in other communities, and we bring that together with people who have, expertise in their own lives, and together we sort of find ways to collaborate. That's kind of the key word, the buzzword, to do something different together than we could have done on our own.
There's a lot of sharing over 10 years then of what works and what doesn't, pragmatic findings, as well as imagine some of it can rise to the level of theory, which I hope it does. For anything that works over a long period of time, we have to get something at a more principled level in order to keep it going. But I'll flip around here again and again, but let's go back to Jeff, who's one of the advisors, Wellville, or more Wellville communities. How, Jeff, does the lessons learned from one place, one Wellville, get into the awareness of another Wellville? Or do they care?
Yeah, they care quite a bit, and they care quite a bit because it was built into that cross community sharing was built into the original model, if you will. It's part of the blueprint for Wellville.
Mm-hmm.
So they have an expectation around that, and in practical ways, we have set up some opportunities for that to happen. On a yearly basis, we bring all 5 of the communities together in one of the communities for a week, and
wow.
Those are they're great events, and everyone loves them. So they're big successes. More regularly, we meet for anyone who is available and interested on somewhat specific topics once a month via Zoom. So, and they usually turn into pretty vibrant conversations among the participants who are usually from the communities. So, there's a hunger for this sort of thing. I think it's pretty well understood, if not from the get-go, then shortly thereafter, that this work is kind of undefined, and we're exploring some territory that for which there's not a great roadmap, and we're sort of creating that map as we go along. They are, and they get a sense of that. So it's important to them, and it's a lot of what this is all about. I did want to, if this is okay, I'd like to just say a little something about your question about educator, and
Sure.
And for some reason, I think this is important to say. Maybe it isn't. You can cut it out later. But I was at one point in a former life a college educator, and the very best experiences I had as a English instructor in a number of different places was when I dropped the artifice of being a professor or an instructor and wanted to learn with them.
Yeah.
And I one notable occasion, I was assigned a course and material I didn't know, and I went in on the first day and said, I don't know this material any better than you do. I do have some tools that you don't have, but let's explore this together.
Yeah.
And I'm going to give you pretty much free rein on how you go about doing that. And I will learn as much by watching how you go about learning this material as you will if I took the more didactic approach. So that was eye-opening to me, and it's a way of going into the communities. Or I carry that.
I was going to say, you're carrying that along.
Yeah, into
putting it to work.
Way I go into the community.
It's a great account. One of the many, many, many reasons that I had this affinity for Peter Vale and Peter's outlook on education was that Peter believed in co-inquiry. And when I was a student in a doctorate program, I actually experienced it, and then I studied it as one of my independent studies and had long conversations with Peter about how he loved to find that line of his knowledge where it sort of faded and there was this sort of open-ended thing. And this is a guy who had went to Harvard and all kinds of, I didn't think there would be a line beyond which his knowledge would fail. But here's the point, to your point, Jeff. He said, what I don't know is what everyone else in that room does know about themselves, about their circumstances, about, what they believe in the world. And so I'm awfully greedy with my time. I don't want to spend it all telling them, just like I'm using your time right now to tell you a story about Peter Vale. But it's wonderfully coincidental that you have this outlook, both of you. Rick, help us understand more about who the people are at the core of the Wellville experience.
Sure.
Either by example of a person or two, or other institutional roles that get developed over time.
Yeah. And I just want to reflect back something. I did listen to some of your podcasts, and one of them was with a former student. And I hear that ongoing interest in learning from each other, with each other in your podcasts.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really
the kick.
Yeah. So just to fill in a little bit of details on Wellville. First, Wellville was started. Officially, we started working with 5 communities back in 2015. And just so everyone knows, the communities are Spartanburg, South Carolina, Lake County, California, Clatsop County, Oregon, Muskegon County, Michigan, and in Hartford, Connecticut, primarily working with North Hartford, which are 3 neighborhoods that designate an area of the city of Hartford. Mm-hmm. And so who we work with in the communities really varies in all of these places. But over time, as you imagine, the work has expanded and shifted, and a lot of it is based on always replacing our previous assumptions with new assumptions about who really needs to be involved in the work, wants to be involved in the work, is sort of inspired by continuing to be part of the work. And that evolves over this period of time. Just to sort of give you some examples, in Hartford, there is a collaborative of institutions called the North Hartford Triple Aim Collaborative, and that includes the 3 health systems, Hartford Healthcare, Trinity Health St. Francis, Children's Medical Center, Connecticut Children's Medical Center. It includes a resident liaison, so somebody who lives in the city of Hartford who has been appointed by the neighborhood groups to represent the resident voice. It includes local community-based organizations like the Village for Families and Children, funders like the United Way, Hartford Foundation. So I use this specific to give you, some sense of what the teams are that we work with in each of the communities. In Spartanburg, it's a little different. In Lake County, California, it's a little different. In Muskegon County, Michigan, it's different. But typically, you'll have these local institutions, health systems, public health professionals, municipal and county government leaders, local nonprofits, and increasingly residents that don't have an organizational affiliation but are truly there, based on the value of their knowledge of the community, and really even more importantly is turning over the decision-making authority to the people who live in the communities, not to those who hold the power, sort of the formal power, but those who will benefit most and therefore should shape the work the most. And they're all I could pick any single one of the people that we work closely with in our communities and tell you stories about them. And last week we had 3 of our communities convened in Hartford. And back to Jeff's point about community to community sharing, Jeff and I were sort of joking, sort of before, during, and after this 2-day convening that, Wellville needs to do very little, because what we need to do is create a space. We need to create a space. And, there is some work involved in creating the kind of space that facilitates sharing and learning together. And I don't want to underplay that. Mm-hmm. But the magic, what really happens is what happened last week, which is that, people from Spartanburg, South Carolina flew up here, and they already have this kinship, this relationship now with people from Hartford, Connecticut that they never would have had, but they gained through this work together. They love each other. They care about each other. They have fun together, and, they are sharing their own struggles and learnings and successes, with each other in very open, very intimate ways. And so as Jeff and I were facilitating and sort of walking around to these breakouts, I just had the biggest smile on my face, because these are people who are driven by work that is incredibly meaningful to them, which is around, creating a healthier, more thriving community for all, and doing it in a way that, is equitable, so that, everyone has that opportunity. And, that's sort of the frame in which they work. But the real, again, magic is this feeling of belonging together and sharing together and learning together and having fun together. And I think that, one of the benefits of a 10-year project is that it facilitates this kind of, deep relationship building, not only in each community, but, among the communities that we work with.
I assume that this may have been one of the first face-to-face convenings that you were able to do, given the restrictions of the pandemic. Is that so, Jeff?
It's actually the second. The first was in May, and that was in Lake County, California. So this was
different groups, or all the groups?
In Lake County, California, that was all the groups.
That was about 80. Your week, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But it must have been first, let's all thank the God for Zoom, because it's kept all of us who are very actively interested in change able to stay connected. But when they first came together for that week, it must have been quite extraordinary. For example, oh, you mean you have a whole body, not just shoulders? But and a lot more fun than that, and a lot more serious stuff than that. I'm curious, over the years that I've thought of health and wellness, I had the privilege of writing a grant to the Kellogg Foundation in the late 70s and early 80s for health education of the public in the state of Maine. And we had some pretty gnarly statistics to deal with. And it was largely about behavioral, changing behavior and changing conversation. It was extremely idealistic, well-funded, but it was kind of discouraging, because the characters came and went, and it was hard to hold a coalition. And I realize now, many years later, that if we had been we didn't have the technology to keep us talking. We had to literally get in the car and drive 80 miles of bad road to get together, even for the 7 campuses of the university that I was working with. But the point is, to this day, we were back in Maine 2 weeks ago, the family back in a little western Maine town where I was working from. And I looked at the people. There was a lot of obesity. There were still people walking down the streets for cigarettes. There was the things that concerned us, and because we knew the numbers in regard to how many morbidity and all the rest occurs from those things that people have the choice to do, wish they didn't. And so if you think of Spartanburg or some of these other locations, are there, after 10 years, in your experiences, visible signs as well as statistical indicators that people are experiencing a better health situation because of their community collaboration? Why don't we start with you, Rick?
Okay. Jeff saying, phew, I'm glad. So this
He went on mute. I don't understand why.
Yeah.
Hard to leave
This is
the
definitely a question of that we're asked quite a bit, especially this far into the project. We have about 2 and a little bit more years left, so we're almost 8 years in. And so I want to give you sort of the formal answer, and then maybe just tease out some of the informalities or reality. So one is that the work that these communities are doing it's not programmatic work. They are really interested in reshaping the community conditions that drive long-term health outcomes. So, take obesity. One solution, in quotes, to that might be to enter more people into programs. Maybe there's a clinical or a coaching component to that. Maybe there are even incentives to, change diets and reward people for healthy behaviors. So much of what the health, public health world especially is looking at what are the influences of those, behaviors, and are there social conditions, cultural conditions, economic conditions, what's the availability of healthy, affordable food in a community? Right. But then, you could even pan back further and say, well, what's causing those conditions, and are there, national subsidies to have us all eat more corn products, for example. So you can keep stepping back, and that is so much. Exactly. And that is so much, the center of the work that we do with communities is that stepping back to really understand, beyond the symptomatic, what is driving these outcomes in the first place. And, when you step back far enough, you realize that it's really a change in thinking that's required, more so than a change in, the immediate, actions, because it's the thinking that led to the conditions, that led to the behaviors, that led to the outcome. So all that said, we got a little formal and serious a few years ago and said, we really do need to be measuring the impact of Wellville, working with these 5 communities. So we brought on board a learning, I emphasize learning, and evaluation partner. Her name is Kathleen Brady. She actually came from one of our communities. She lives outside of Spartanburg, South Carolina, and we brought her on board because she has credentials. She's a professional evaluator and has deep experience in that. But she also, understands the work that we're doing in ways that somebody who, is completely detached from it might not. Yeah,
it would be a very different read on your work.
And she, if she were here, she would do a little better job than probably a much better job than I will. But she's measuring these things. She is measuring sort of a scorecard or a series of indicators on well-being measures, like long-term well-being measures, poverty rates, high school graduation rates, incarceration rates, but also things like, feeling like a sense of belonging in your communities. So, these sort of, indicators around social indicators. So she's got this series of, quantitative measures that she's looking at for all 5 communities over the decade that we're working together with these communities. Then she has another set of measures that are more like process measures. They're things like, what is the level at which local institutions, residents, and government officials are collaborating today versus, how well they were collaborating at the start of the project. So
that's a biggie.
It is a big one. What is the capacity of, these are sort of evaluation technical terms, but what is the capacity of the community to continue the work, beyond Wellville's 10 years? Like, have they formalized, some sort of a collaborative, and does that collaborative have sources of funding, and is that funding sustainable? And not that that's the only thing that they need to continue doing the work, but she's looking at these process measures. And then, finally, I think she's looking at things that really matter to the individual communities themselves. And they do all have initiatives. I'll say in Lake County, California, for example, where there are a very high number of people who are experiencing homelessness, in a state where homelessness is already at high levels. They have created an initiative with a facility called Hope Center, which is providing supportive housing and pathways to employment for people who are experiencing homelessness and sort of these supportive services. So over time, Lake County wants to measure the impact of that collaboration around a series of support systems in, helping people find permanent homes on a, more regular, more permanent, or, more sustainable basis than they were, 10 years ago. So there are measures.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think for us, I think we're probably more interested in these longer term trends, and those are more qualitative.
So great, Jeff. You're an advisor, as is Rick, to these Wellvilles. What is your recent experience in the way of, wow, I never thought of that before, kind of advising, where you were drawn in and then surprised like hell?
Well, you're gonna have to edit. I guess you edit these. No.
Oh yeah, well, I do. I do.
Well, good, because I'm pausing. I'm drawing a blank.
I threw a fastball at you, not out of deep curiosity, because I tend to believe, as a fellow practitioner, that we look forward to the surprises, even if we're caught on our heels, even if something that we thought was working smoothly suddenly develops a huge pothole. So I'm not looking for negs per se, but I'm looking at what you're learning, or is it so smooth now that?
Oh no, it's not smooth. But there's a couple things that I want to say, and I'm not sure they really answer your question, but I can't answer the question until I clear these things out of the hopper. And they kind of go together. You said something maybe 15 minutes ago or so, a wonderful description, and you called us the Wellville experience.
Yeah,
and that is I hadn't thought of that before, and I'm sort of miffed at myself for not having thought of it before. We are often asked to, as you are asking us to, in some ways, to describe what it is we are and what we do. Mm-hmm. And the typical way of going about answering that question, and Rick kind of did this, you led him to this, was to describe the project and some of the projects that are going on in our communities. And it is with these projects that measurement and evaluation can occur. But that misses a big piece of what we are. And you named it: experience, the Wellville experience. You can't measure that. You can't evaluate it, not at least with any tools that we know of.
Right here. So, I'm pointing to the hot.
That's it. That's it. So I am interested, and maybe there is a surprise here. I'm interested in something that is really abstract, maybe even kind of radical, and that is an evaluation technique that is in itself an intervention. That is in the evaluating, as sort of as it would be conventionally understood, there's change occurring. And that will happen when the community itself becomes its own evaluator.
Uh-huh.
And that becomes an experience.
Yeah.
And the surprise is that this might not be such a crazy idea after all. I've started to talk to people in Spartanburg about it, and turns out there are ways of doing this.
Sure.
And they're eager to try it. the barrier is that we're so locked into the quantitative measures that they get all the attention, and it's hard to sort of shift people into thinking of the value of something that is innately difficult, if not impossible, to attach numbers to. I have a good friend who is a professor at the Harvard Business School, and he's fond of saying, "What gets measured gets done." And I talked to him about that.
I've heard that many times.
Yeah, and he sort of looked at me like, why are you asking me about that? Everybody knows that's how the world works. And I wonder if there's another way the world could be working, and maybe even is, and it's just sort of hidden behind all of that.
I have a lot of fun at another time just playing with that one premise. I'm seeing across my forehead comes the headline, well. That's the word that keeps coming up. And a doctor will say you're well. Each practitioner looks at the individual. Well, you're learning in your academic achievement, looks good. But John Doe knows well, and he knows when he is not well. And he is, and she and they are in the community 24 by 7. And my point of view would be to get to know John, who's not maybe in one of your organized groups, but have a coffee with John, as we used to do when I worked in rural Maine, and say, how you doing? And boy, if you listen, as I was a sociologist by early education, if you listen with that larger question in your head, how's this community doing? How's this town doing? You listen to John over coffee and watch his handshake and know he's looking forward to a beer, not a coffee. And then I start thinking, well, what's going on here? So I'm stretching the point, and I shouldn't, because the time is yours and I'm doing a lot of talking. But Rick, back to that. What about that idea of understanding the consequences of Wellville from things that aren't easily measured, but are known pretty well by almost anyone living in that town?
That's great. Thanks, Dave, for sharing that story. That was right on. The terminology that, researchers might use is self-reported health status.
Yeah.
And it turns out it's one of the best predictors of, actual physical and mental health is, how I feel, I'm not the doctor, but when you ask me like, how's your health? How I answer that question is an excellent predictor of your future, physical and mental, sort of, health. And, because I think what you're getting at is that, there is something intuitive here. There's something intuitive in terms of like, that's why I resisted a little bit. I'm an educator. I'm going to tell people, what well-being is, no, people have, their own real experience of well-being, and they know what that is in ways that I can't tell them. They experience it.
Yeah.
And so much. So maybe a surprise is how much our work changes, every single moment, because we hear something that is revealing in a community that hopefully changes our outside assumptions about that community. And, last week, when we had 3 communities gathered in North Hartford, we had residents of North Hartford who very generously shared their their moment in the coffee shop. It was a little bit different because we sort of had them with a group of chairs in the front of a room, and there were other people there. But they very generously invited us into their experience of living in North Hartford. And they really shared it from an aspirational standpoint, like why they believe in the work that they're supporting locally as residents in a community, which from the outside could look like a lot of deficits. It would be, and that is one of the issues that we confront is when you look at any of our 5 communities, it's very easy to spot problems.
Oh, yeah.
We're sort of attuned to that. And we're like, well, what's the diabetes rate? What's the poverty rate? What's the crime rate? What we heard last week are, very different stories of strength and assets. Not to say that, there aren't challenges in the communities. So I do feel like that is a great predictor, but so not only is it self-reported health status, but here's like self-reported community status, and that there's this group of residents who are together, who, are sort of mutually supporting each other. And, they sort of reflected back to us, we had no idea there were people like you, these people who are in institutions and positions of power, and that, we hold a lot of assumptions about you too. And, and so they're sort of in front of us, like dismantling their own assumptions about that. And, and as Jeff said, experience, like when we get into these spaces, it's an experience of, our shared humanity. And that, how do you measure that? I don't know. It's a felt experience. I don't have a meter for it, but I can tell you, and Jeff and I were chatting about this morning, that, the way I felt last week, it was just a real high. And, just knowing deeply that, this is a good use of me as a human being and a good use of my time, because it was reflected back by the other people who were in the room. So that's what I would say. And I love your story, and we've got a lot like it. Jeff has actually done some beautiful writing about individuals in Spartanburg. And, it opens us all up to see beyond the assumptions that we already hold about, people and communities and what's possible. And, if you can't do that, then it's going to be really hard to get unstuck, from the challenges, from the issues that we say that we want to change.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. And Jeff, I'm going to throw you back on the griddle here with the last couple of minutes of our podcast time. And let me put it another way. If you could keep doing this indefinitely, would you?
Yeah, I would. But it's probably, it would probably be meaningful to think a little bit about what this is.
Well, this sounds to me like it's changing pretty regularly, so that may not be this may not be the was. But if you could continue to have this access to this amazing, and I truly believe amazing, social phenomenon called Wellville indefinitely, and advise it and convene, is that sort of a life work for you right now?
Yeah, yes, because it is, it's an enactment of everything that I've been working toward for kind of ever. That story I told about the classroom, and fessing up that I'm not the expert here. Let's learn this together. That was a life-changing moment. That happened in 1989, maybe something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's 40 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
And that really set the course of my life in a big way. It helped me to be okay not knowing everything and not having to pretend that I knew things. And I'm not great at that. I mean, that little psychological move that one has to make sort of letting go. You're practicing that every moment of every day.
That's a great way to put it. Absolutely.
So that's a life's work, and Wellville happens to be, I think, the apotheosis of that experience,
Wow.
the highest statement of it. And that's a credit to Rick and to our founder, Esther.
Yes, we should mention.
Definitely. Esther Dyson. Here's something I'll just say. I know we're running out of time. This is a quick little snippet. She sends out probably 1,000 emails a day. She is obsessive about keeping her inbox down close to zero, and she gets lots of emails a day. Every one of the emails that she sends out has a signature line at the bottom, and it says, it's her name, and it says, always make new mistakes.
It's my kind of people.
Yeah.
You two have become my kind of people. Hopefully I'm your kind of person. I think we have a common cause. I have a big question mark after the word practice, and so did Peter Vale. And what he did, as brilliant as he was, is say, I'm not going to theorize about practice, but I think we need to understand it. So I'm going to give you some conjectures. And he created 32 of them. Conjectures. He easily could have fought for those ideas to become publishable theories of how people do things and why. But he wanted to invite people to look at a conjecture, and then what I wrote in adding to the book was sort of guidance, like you do. I was advisor to people reading Peter's work. It's weird how that turned out, but it was a perfect way for me to be respectful of my teacher, knowing that I know a lot of stuff too, but it would not make any difference at all if I told everyone what I thought about practice too. I wanted it to be a symbiosis. And I look at you two gentlemen, and the folks can't see you, but I can, and I think there's two fellows who really enjoy the adventure of Wellville, and maybe one day we'll have Well Nation. Who knows? So thank you both.
Thank you, Dave.
This is very enjoyable. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Practice Podcast, where we discuss practice with a capital P. If you'd like to hear more, listen in on Spotify, Automatic, and Apple Podcasts, or go to inactionresearch.com/podcast-page. And if you'd like to learn more about social inaction and the nature of practice, head over to inactionresearch.com for more information. Thank you for supporting this show. We look forward to hearing from you soon.
Oh, and one more thing. How could I forget? The book on practice as a way of being is available now in digital form, something that would be new, like podcasting to many of us. And it's a great way of learning more and more about what this podcast presented when Peter Vale and I originated it several years ago. So please come to mylibrary.world/practice, and you'll see what I mean. Thank you.